And so with personal responsibility, Booker T. Washington said, "It is important and right that all privileges of law be ours, but it is vastly more important that we be prepared for the exercise of these privileges." So in other words, what he was saying is, what good is it to have these privileges if we're not prepared? We don't know how to use them. We don't know what to do with them. But he wasn't saying we shouldn't be able to vote and we shouldn't have this and we shouldn't have that. But right now, let's start from the bottom. We just got out of slavery. He started Tuskegee 16 years after slavery ended. And many of the people that didn't know how to read or write, and a lot of them didn't even know how to use a toothbrush. And so when he first got to Tuskegee, he traveled outside of the area where he was going to open the school, and he went into the rural country districts of Tuskegee. And what he found was people, they were outside, they were dirty. A lot of the kids didn't even have on clothes, and if they did, it was so dirty you couldn't even recognize it. It was greasy, maybe a T-shirt or something. And so again, most of them couldn't read or write, and many of them didn't even know how to use a toothbrush. So these were in days like long before now. You know, this was the worst conditions ever for blacks in America during this time, and this was around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so one thing that he taught was prepare the head, the hand, and the heart. And that meant the head was education, getting your education. The hand was hard work, so you're not just going to get your education, but you're going to work hard. And character building. And he figured what they knew, being former slaves, was they grew their own food, they built buildings, they did all kinds of work as slaves. So in school, his philosophy was that we're going to take what we already know and we're going to perfect it. And we're going to become business, land, and property owners. I was on a panel in Buffalo, New York for the 100 years of the Niagara Movement. The Niagara Movement was a precursor to the NAACP, and it was started by W.E.B. Du Bois. And it was to conquer some of Booker T. Washington's ideas. And so there were 3 other people on the panel, and they were professors, and this was long before I thought someone would invite me to come teach. But they were professors at universities and authors, and they were all on the side of W.E.B. Du Bois, which, you know, I find sad that we have to take a side. But they were, and they wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise. But one guy, and he said, Booker T. Washington, all he wanted was people to be slaves again. He didn't want, and I'm thinking, wow, there's so much ignorance out there. Unless you studied it, you know, you shouldn't really be talking about things you don't really know. And this guy is quite accomplished. But he wanted people not to be slaves, but to own their own business and their businesses and land and property. And there is a book called Christian Business Legends. And it says that by 1905, Tuskegee Institute at the time had produced more millionaires than Harvard, Princeton, and Yale combined, self-made millionaires. So he'd, you know, there were people that owned insurance companies and even banks back then. There were all kinds of things that we wouldn't think of that were going on. Okay, and then character building was very important for him. The students had to have discipline. They had to participate in ROTC. They had to in prayer meetings and things, because they had come out of slavery, or some of them hadn't, but their parents had. And so it was important that they were disciplined. Some people said he was really strict, but he had to be. I mean, if you can imagine our kids today in 2013 and what he was dealing with back then, he had to be very strict. And so here's another quote. He says, "How I wish from the most cultured and highly endowed university in the great North to the humblest log cabin schoolhouse in Alabama, we would burn, as it were, into the hearts and heads of all, that usefulness, that service to our brothers is the supreme end of education." So there again, he's talking about lifting others up. And hard work, We must not only become reliable, progressive, skillful, and intelligent, but we must keep the idea constantly before our youth that all forms of labor, whether with the head or the hand, honorable. And I think that's really important. They really praise our youth that are going on to colleges like Harvard or Yale or Howard or Spelman or, you know, but what it does to the youth that are maybe going to College of Alameda or going to Laney College or going to a trade school, you know, it sends them a message. And so I think that we do need to let our youth know that it's all honorable. I mean, we couldn't sit in these chairs. We wouldn't be in these buildings if somebody didn't go to trade schools and learn how. And that's what Booker T. Washington and his education model, yeah, well, what he did when he got to Tuskegee and he opened it on July 4th, 1881, and there were only 3 small buildings, and he said, and they were torn down, and they're full of like brush and trees. If you've ever been to the South, just trees. And he said, we're going to cut down these trees. We're going to make room to grow our buildings, grow our food, so we have food to eat. And the students, they protested loudly. They were like, you know, we're getting our education now. So after hundreds of years of slavery, there's no way we're getting ready to get out there and do all of that. But when he picked up the first axe and he led the way through the forest of trees, they willingly, the students and the faculty, began to follow. So they, you know, that's just an incredible example of effective leadership.